This isn't just about India and Pakistan anymore. It's about China, its weapons, its credibility.
When India and Pakistan clash, there is always a third player watching closely from the sidelines: China. While the world sees a two-nation conflict, the real game has been triangular, and for a long time now.
Pakistan's military today is overwhelmingly Chinese. Jets, missiles, radar and air defense systems. Over 80% of its arsenal has been supplied by Beijing.
From military support to strategic cover, Beijing has consistently backed Islamabad, sometimes quietly, sometimes overtly. This is the story of the India-China-Pakistan triangle and why the next war may not be fought on one front alone.
This no longer concerns just India and Pakistan. China now stands central. Its arms, its ambitions, are all entwined. When India and Pakistan confront each other, a third power always watches closely: China. What appears as a two-party clash is in truth a three-sided game, and has been for years. Pakistan's defense today is largely Chinese: aircraft, missiles, radar, and systems. Over 80% of its gear comes from Beijing. From weapons to political shielding, China backs Pakistan, sometimes discreetly, sometimes openly. This triangle, India, China, Pakistan, shows that the next war may stretch across more than one frontier. While the world sees a local issue, Pakistan is the tool and China the tactician. It started with an attack in Kashmir, killing 26 civilians. India blamed Pakistan, and on May 7th struck targets in Pakistan, and Pakistan held Kashmir. Pakistan hit back with air power, drones, and missiles, and that's when China's role became visible. Chinese weapons dominated the fight, including J-10C fighters. Pakistan's government said those jets downed some Indian Rafales. American sources confirmed it. The J-10C's performance boosted China's defense reputation and even raised its arms market value. Pakistan also used JF-17s, co-developed with China, armed with advanced systems like the PL-15 missile. Then came a curious twist. In April 2025, as tension rose, China rushed in PL-5 missiles to Pakistan, while still claiming to support peace. These were reportedly used to down Indian jets, and one unexploded PL-15 was recovered, possibly exposing Chinese secrets. So who's really at war here? It doesn't stop with missiles. China has also delivered full defense packages: HQ-9P+ systems, CH-4 drones, and Wing-Long TUS. Beijing has even assisted Pakistan with intelligence. In May 2025, Chinese fishing vessels appeared near Indian naval drills, likely collecting sensitive data. China's 100+ spy satellites probably relay information to Pakistan too. This backing dangerously sharpens Indo-Pak conflict, raising India's fears. It now appears China is waging a proxy war on India via Pakistan. But it's not just proxy war. China is also showing muscle. Just before fighting flared, the PLA conducted huge drills near the LAC, the line of actual control, the disputed border in the Himalayas. This was a clear act of provocation. The LAC, or line of actual control, marks contested ground and has long been a flashpoint. China's drills were a message. It's not afraid of confrontation. China remains highly engaged across social media networks, spreading misleading narratives and suppressing posts that reveal uncomfortable truths. Videos like this one often become targets of coordinated CCP bot activity, manipulation. That's why you can support us by simply liking and subscribing below. At present, India faces a serious strategic dilemma. It's surrounded. To the west, there's Pakistan, now armed with Chinese firepower, and to the north, China's military looms. India finds itself boxed in. A strong response to Pakistan might give China the pretext it's waiting for to step in directly, igniting a larger conflict. The bias is clear in how China handles the situation. Its leadership and media constantly echo pro-Pakistan narratives, which frustrates India immensely. Take the Pulwama incident. Instead of condemning it outright, China called for an impartial probe, subtly backing Pakistan's denial of involvement. Chinese outlets even frame India as the aggressor and resurrect old clips of past skirmishes, portraying Indian troops in a poor light. This type of calculated media manipulation, like showing PLA soldiers overpowering Indian forces, chips away at India's image globally. It complicates India's attempts to garner international support and increases internal pressure on its leaders to respond firmly. Public outrage over China's provocations might push India to take bolder moves, like reinforcing troops along the LAC or scrapping the 2024 border pact many already criticize as overly lenient. China's provocations aren't hidden anymore. It's baiting India, nudging it toward escalation. What started as simmering tension has become overt provocation. And at the heart of this strategy lies Beijing's ambition to sideline India's rise. As India expands its influence, becomes more self-reliant, and strengthens ties with powers like the U.S., China sees a growing threat. To counter that, China keeps India entangled, using Pakistan to constantly create instability on India's western flank. This strategy distracts India from asserting itself in other arenas like the Indo-Pacific or the high Himalayas. But it's also a clever way for China to test its own military hardware. By supplying Pakistan with advanced systems and observing how they perform in live combat, China gains priceless intel without risking its own troops. This allows Beijing to refine its weapons while watching how they fare against Indian defenses. When the time comes for a direct showdown, China wants to be prepared. Of course, Pakistan has deep-rooted motives of its own. The animosity with India goes back decades, and the CCP is simply exploiting that dynamic, fueling the flames just enough to keep India off balance, without tipping into full-scale war. As the current tensions dominate the news cycle, they're just surface-level symptoms of a much older geopolitical rivalry. To really understand China's actions in 2025, we must go back to the beginning. Surprisingly, in the 1950s, India and China weren't enemies. Under Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, India was among the first non-communist nations to formally recognize Mao Zedong's government in 1949. At the time, both countries shared a sense of post-colonial unity, India emerging from British rule, China from civil war. They even cooperated on foreign policy goals like non-alignment in the Cold War, envisioning a global order that wasn't dictated by Western superpowers. But things took a turn by the late 50s. Mao shifted course, beginning to view India not as a peer but as a competitor. The real fracture came in 1959 when the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader, fled to India after Beijing crushed an uprising. China was enraged by India's decision to grant asylum to him and thousands of Tibetan refugees. In Mao's eyes, this was a blatant intrusion into China's internal affairs, and it marked a turning point in bilateral ties. Then there's the border dispute, the core of today's tensions. The India-China boundary stretches over 3,400 kilometers across the Himalayas. During British colonial rule in India, and while China was governed by emperors, the demarcation was left vague and unresolved. That ambiguity has become a dangerous fault line. This ambiguity divided the frontier into three main regions: Western, Central, and Eastern, each with its own separate disputes. In the Western region, the main point of contention is Aksai Chin, a desolate high-altitude plateau covering around 38,000 square kilometers. India maintains its part of Jammu and Kashmir based on older British-era maps like the 1865 Johnson Line, which placed Aksai Chin within Indian territory. China, however, insists it belongs to Xinjiang, citing Qing dynasty documents and historical nomadic use of the land. During the 1950s, China quietly occupied Aksai Chin and constructed a key highway through it, Highway 219, linking Xinjiang to Tibet. India saw this as a stealth invasion, but for China, the road became vital to military logistics. Unsurprisingly, they weren't about to surrender it. The central sector, covering regions like Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand, has fewer large disputes, but tensions still arise. There are about 8 smaller contested zones here, such as Barahoti and the Spiti Valley, where disagreements exist over border demarcation. These remote mountain areas aren't always the site of big conflicts, but do see frequent standoffs when patrol units from each side encounter one another unexpectedly. The eastern sector is where the situation is most explosive. This area involves Arunachal Pradesh, a 90,000 square kilometer state that India governs, but China claims nearly in full. Beijing calls it South Tibet or Zhangnan, and argues it was historically part of Tibet before British colonization. One especially sensitive location is Ta Vang, home to a significant Buddhist monastery that China says once fell under Tibetan rule. India, on the other hand, cites the McMahon Line, drawn in 1914 during the Simla Conference between British India, Tibet, and a Chinese envoy. This line placed Arunachal, including Tawang, firmly within Indian territory. China, however, disputes this, saying their delegate at the time lacked authority, and thus the agreement is invalid. This makes the eastern sector a constant source of friction, especially with the cultural and military importance of Tawang. The root issue across all three sectors is the absence of a mutually recognized border. Treaties like the 1842 Treaty of Chushul, for example, offered vague language about traditional boundaries without any clear definition. Combine this with the harsh and shifting Himalayan terrain, where glaciers, rivers, and peaks are in constant flux. By the late 1950s, this poorly defined frontier had become a powder keg. As Mao's view of India grew colder, both sides began physically asserting their claims. They started setting up outposts in contested zones. India built positions in Aksai Chin, or near the McMahon Line, and China answered by establishing posts of its own. Skirmishes followed, such as the 1959 shootout at Konka Pass in the west that left 9 Indian soldiers dead, and the clash at Longju in the east. Both nations were playing a dangerous game of brinkmanship, and escalation seemed inevitable. In 1962, the conflict boiled over into full-scale war. China launched simultaneous attacks in Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh. The Indian army was ill-equipped, lacking winter gear, weaponry, and acclimatization for mountain combat. China quickly overran large areas. However, after about a month of fighting, Beijing declared a ceasefire. They withdrew from Arunachal but retained control over Aksai Chin, a situation that remains unresolved till today. The line of actual control, or LAC, became the de facto boundary, yet it's not a strict line, more a zone patrolled by both sides, with no consensus on where it truly begins or ends. There are 15 to 20 disputed sections, areas like the Galwan Valley, Pangong Lake, and Depsang Plains, where maps do not agree, sparking repeated tension. After the 1962 war, India and China drifted into a cold silence, barely engaging in dialogue, even as both fortified the frontier. The LAC grew to be one of the world's most militarized borders, with massive deployments. China also drew nearer to Pakistan, India's main foe, offering arms and inking a 1963 pact to take part of Pakistan-held Kashmir, land India claims. That alliance felt like a betrayal to India. China wasn't just a neighbor in dispute, it was now siding with its arch-rival. The 60s and 70s were shaped by deeper rivalries. India aligned with the Soviet Union in 1971, formalizing ties with a treaty of friendship. China viewed this move as a strategy to box them in. Then in 1974, India tested its first nuclear bomb, stirring deeper worries in Beijing about India's growing clout. By the 1980s, the tension grew tiring, and in 1988, Indian PM Rajiv Gandhi visited China, a major diplomatic reset. They pledged to build trade, enhance cultural ties, and keep the border dialogue alive to avoid any conflict. It was a diplomatic win, though the actual border stayed undefined. The LAC remained vague, and troops still clashed in disputed areas. Through the 90s and early 2000s, both nations tried to cool tensions even as their rivalry deepened. In 1993 and 1996, they signed accords to prevent escalation, banning firearms and sudden military drills, and ensuring steady communication. These steps helped prevent small disputes from escalating, but the root issue, the unclear border, was left unresolved. Meanwhile, both India and China became economic giants. Trade reached $70 billion by 2010, yet strategic trust lagged. China built ports in Sri Lanka and Pakistan, which India viewed as encirclement. In reply, India grew closer to the US, Japan, and Australia, joining forums like the Quad, a move China saw as resistance to its regional ambitions. Border incidents, however, persisted, like the 2013 Chinese camp at Depsang or the 2014 standoff in Chumar. Though settled through diplomacy, these skirmishes exposed how volatile the LAC remained. In 2017, the stakes rose at Doklam, a plateau where China, Bhutan, and India intersect. China began road work on land Bhutan claims, but it neared India's Siliguri corridor, a narrow, strategic zone connecting northeast India to the rest. Just 20 kilometers wide at its thinnest, it's a major vulnerability. If cut off, India's entire northeast could be isolated, creating military and economic peril. Alarmed, India dispatched troops, fearing the road would give China a wartime edge. For 73 days, both sides held their positions, armed and alert. Dialogue eased the standoff, but Doklam marked a shift. India was willing to act, and Bhutan's role complicated things. Then came 2020, and the Galwan clash, the worst since 1962. With India building roads near the LAC, like the Darbuk-Shayok-Dibyo route in Ladakh, China felt its hold challenged. Tensions soared, made worse by India's 2019 decision to reorganize Jammu and Kashmir, turning Ladakh into its own territory. China, claiming Aksai Chin within it, saw this as provocation. Under Xi Jinping, China adopted a bold foreign policy. In June 2020, troops clashed in Galwan Valley. Due to packs, guns weren't used, only clubs and rocks. The brutal melee killed 20 Indian troops, and China lost around 40, though it never confirmed details. The deaths shocked both sides, as none had occurred in decades. Galwan reset the status quo. The border dispute is central to this conflict. India and China share a vast, 3,400 kilometers Himalayan border that was never clearly demarcated, leading to overlapping claims and tensions. This ambiguity set the stage for future confrontations. It came as a jolt. After years of no casualties along the border, the Galwan clash changed the game entirely. Suddenly, both nations mobilized tens of thousands of troops, backed by tanks, artillery, and fighter aircraft. Key areas such as Pangong Tso, Gagra, and Hot Springs turned into high-alert zones, with soldiers stationed just kilometers from one another. India retaliated beyond the battlefield, banning over 200 Chinese apps, including TikTok, and putting tighter scrutiny on Chinese investments. The country also ramped up support for local manufacturing, aiming to cut dependence on Chinese imports. Diplomatic and military talks followed in waves. Some gains were made, including a partial disengagement from Pangong in 2021. But many regions remain volatile. China's built permanent infrastructure, bases, roads, and even entire villages near the LAC, signaling it has no plans to step back. India's responded with tunnel systems and all-weather roads of its own. Occasional scuffles still break out, underscoring the ever-present risk of escalation. This border standoff is a hotspot between two global powers and could erupt with little notice. Modern warfare, though, goes far beyond traditional weapons. Economic power, diplomatic clout, and global influence have become essential parts of the struggle. And on that front, China has long been playing a complex game. Its Belt and Road Initiative, introduced by President Xi Jinping in 2013, appears on the surface to be a generous infrastructure push, helping poor nations with roads, ports, and railways. But there's a hidden cost. When countries fail to repay China's loans, Beijing often seizes control of strategic assets, giving it enormous leverage across continents. This model of debt-driven influence has helped China expand its reach. To date, it's poured over $1.2 trillion into these efforts, $74 billion in construction deals, and $470 billion in non-financial investments. Just in 2024, China executed nearly $71 billion in construction contracts and another $51 billion in capital infusions. These ventures amplify Beijing's strategic and economic presence across Asia and beyond. Ports in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Pakistan, and a military base in Djibouti form a network known as the String of Pearls, positions that could potentially blockade India's vital trade routes if conflict breaks out. India sees this as a growing threat and has decided to push back hard. It adopted a sharper approach, tightening security and seeking alliances. New Delhi now worries that nations indebted to China may not challenge Beijing even when provoked, or worse, may host Chinese military assets. India's answer? Forge friendships, offer financial alternatives, and strengthen its own economy. One part of this plan is a strategic initiative called the Necklace of Diamonds, built to counter China's encirclement strategy with influence and partnerships of its own. Since 2018, India began signing agreements with Singapore and Indonesia to utilize their key naval ports near the Strait of Malacca. It also gained access to Oman's Duqm port, which lies between Chinese-linked sites in Djibouti and Pakistan, supporting Iran in building the Chabahar port, opening up trade into Central Asia. To push back against the BRI, India launched projects of its own. One is the International North-South Transport Corridor, an initiative that connects India to Europe and Russia via Iran and Central Asia using rail, road, and sea. Another is the India-Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, which links Indian ports with Europe through the Gulf. These give other countries alternatives to China's networks, expanding India's influence in global commerce. These strategies help India protect key trade lanes and make sure China doesn't dominate them. In this way, India is becoming a counterweight to China's expansion. India is also extending credit lines to nearby nations so they're less dependent on Beijing. It gave $8 billion to Bangladesh, $2.1 billion to Sri Lanka after its 2022 financial crisis, $1.7 billion to Nepal, and $13 billion to the Maldives. These loans come with fewer strings attached, making India a more trusted partner. While its lending isn't as vast as China's, the focus on regional allies aims to block Chinese expansion. For instance, Indian aid to Sri Lanka helped stop Beijing from gaining further control after leasing the Hambantota port. But India's strongest tool may be its economic rise. It's emerging as a manufacturing power, and firms are shifting operations from China. India stands out for its large labor pool, competitive wages, and investor-friendly policies. Apple is among the most notable companies making this shift. The tech firm has scaled up iPhone production in Tamil Nadu since launching at a Foxconn plant, and by 2025, it's producing 20% of iPhones in India, up from just 1% 2 decades ago, a $22 billion output. Foxconn is not only growing current factories, but also building a large new unit in Karnataka, showing deep commitment. The move is driven by India's cheaper labor and strong incentives. Samsung, another electronics leader, has invested in one of the world's largest smartphone plants in Noida, Uttar Pradesh, turning out millions of units for both India and export. It's not just a reactionary move, it's a strategic pivot to capitalize on India's tech talent and growing economy. Dell and HP have followed suit, relocating parts of their production to India. These shifts are part of a larger movement by tech giants to diversify supply chains and reduce exposure to China. At the same time, India is expanding into advanced sectors like semiconductors and electric vehicles, giving it a niche in global production. Thanks to government support programs like the Production-Linked Incentive (PLI) scheme, India is drawing major investments in high-growth industries. Even Chinese firms like Haier have seen the potential, setting up factories in India to serve both local and international markets. This indicates India's appeal isn't limited to Western brands. It's becoming a manufacturing center that attracts global attention. What makes India stand out isn't only its affordability, though low costs play a big role. Wages in India are still much cheaper than in China, making it a smart pick for companies seeking savings without compromising standards. But India's true strength lies in its scale and policy support. It has a vast and growing skilled labor pool, while the government continues to offer tax incentives, invest in infrastructure, and simplify rules to help industries flourish. As a result, India's economy is projected to surpass China's in growth speed. In 2024, India saw GDP growth of about 7% compared to China's 4.82%. The forecast for 2025 shows India growing at 6.46%, while China is expected to grow at 4.48%. Clearly, India is growing faster. Still, China remains far ahead in absolute numbers. Its economy is valued at $18.5 trillion, much bigger than India's $4.1 trillion, and China controls 11% of global trade, compared to India's modest 2.7%. But China faces real setbacks. The U.S. trade war is hitting hard, with Chinese exports declining amid steep tariffs of up to 145%. Essentially, China and India are both racing for influence across the region and world. Their goals clash. China uses its massive economy to make other nations reliant on it, hoping to keep them close. Meanwhile, India is fostering fresh alliances, wisely lending money, and positioning itself as a new production base. Both nations want to dominate trade routes and lead in Asia. It's a fierce rivalry, and every strategic move counts. To stay ahead, India keeps taking steps to reduce Chinese influence. One measure is cutting imports from China. The government has raised duties on Chinese goods like clothing and electronics. Rules for Chinese companies wanting to invest in India are stricter now, requiring prior approval, which slows down foreign influence. These changes help India protect its economy and push local industries. India is also working hard to build more at home. The Make in India campaign invites firms to manufacture domestically. Products like smartphones, pharmaceuticals, and solar panels are being made locally. The PLI scheme further boosts this by rewarding businesses that produce within India. Companies making electronics or EV parts receive financial benefits for opening operations in India, leading to more factories in places like Tamil Nadu and Gujarat. Even with these efforts, India still imports far more from China than it exports, about $85 billion more. But by making more locally, India is aiming to close that gap and become less dependent on Chinese goods. And India's efforts go beyond its own borders. It's also working to grow global trade ties. The government is actively negotiating trade pacts with countries such as the US, the EU, and Australia. These agreements aim to make it easier for Indian businesses to export textiles, software, and other products, while also importing high-tech goods and resources like lithium for batteries. India is part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, too, a group that includes major economies like the US, Japan, and South Korea, further boosting cooperation on trade, technology, and supply chains. India is actively seeking new partners for key supplies, like semiconductors and steel, to avoid over-reliance on China. For instance, Japan and India are teaming up to produce components for electric vehicles. These alliances not only diversify India's sources, but also make its economy more integrated into the global system. With such cooperation, India is rising as a viable manufacturing hub, rivaling China's long-standing dominance. These global collaborations ensure that India has multiple trade pathways and won't be cornered into dependency on any one nation. Now consider India's evolving diplomatic relationships. India plays a key role in forums like BRICS and the G20, which shape international policy on trade, climate, and security. Within BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, India consistently opposes China's attempts to dominate, advocating for balanced representation and fair funding strategies. In the G20, India champions equitable global commerce and tech distribution, curbing China's grip on these sectors. India is also forging closer ties with others wary of Beijing. A good example is its growing cooperation with Taiwan in chipmaking and AI research. These joint ventures boost India's tech scene while avoiding dependence on China. In Southeast Asia, India partners with Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, nations concerned about China's aggressive moves in the South China Sea. India conducts naval drills and shares maritime defense strategies like coastal protection and shipbuilding ideas with these countries. This work extends into the Quad Alliance, which includes India, the US, Japan, and Australia. The Quad works to maintain stability and fairness in the Indo-Pacific, directly opposing Beijing's attempts at dominance. No wonder China views India as a growing threat. Every strategic move India makes, from economic ties to security pacts, builds its influence and counters China's rise. India is also reducing its dependence on Chinese imports. The government raised tariffs on Chinese products like gadgets and apparel. Chinese investments now require special approvals, limiting their reach. These policies give India more control over its economy and lessen Beijing's sway. The Make in India initiative encourages local manufacturing, from phones to pharmaceuticals. The production-linked incentive PLI, Scheme supports firms that produce domestically. Through all these efforts, trade, diplomacy, and defense, India is carving out its role as a formidable power in Asia. In 2025, these efforts matter more than ever. China's backing of Pakistan through tech, arms, and strategy has escalated the latest crisis beyond what it might have been. Even after a ceasefire was announced, Pakistan continued fighting using Chinese support, keeping pressure on India. Whether China is orchestrating events or simply lending a hand, it has become a central factor in the region's volatility. But India is far from a pushover. With a powerful military, a growing economy, and strong global alliances, India stands resilient. This isn't just a regional rivalry, it's a competition that could define the next era in Asia and the global power structure. The coming years will decide who takes the lead.